Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Joe Saunders, author of Bouncer Stories, One Man's Life Behind the Velvet Rope. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Well, we are thrilled to have you. Are you ready to begin?
Absolutely.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
It's such a cliched answer, but the one piece of advice is you just need to write, even if it's not good, even if you don't feel it, even if you're not motivated, even if you think it's rubbish, just put words on paper and let it flow. That is probably the biggest thing that I struggled with was feeling like what I was writing wasn't good enough, or I couldn't think of anything original to say, or that I was just repeating myself. But the act of getting in and writing is well, that's the whole art of it. And another little tip that I've picked up from my most recent book is leave each session unfinished. So this is actually something I picked up from reading Robert Cialdini's book Persuasion, which was the allure of something that's unfinished. So if you know how a paragraph should end, don't finish it now. Leave it unfinished, and then when you come back to write, you'll automatically have impetus to start writing because you'll know what you've got to write first, and then the momentum will carry you through.
I think it's the main thing, too, is just getting started. One of my favorite quotes is from Lao Tzu, where he talk about the journey of 1,000 miles just begins with those first steps. I think it's just getting into the habit of getting started and just getting on with it.
Yeah. And you're going to do so many edits anyway that you may as well just write rubbish to begin with. It doesn't really make a difference in the long run. Eventually, you'll get to the good stuff.
Well, and that's what the editors are for, right? Get your content out, get everything there, let the editors clean it from that point.
Absolutely.
Well, what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
I think, my first book was self-published, and I think the hardest part is just having the confidence to actually publish something. It's getting the product to the point where you're prepared to put it in front of the public. And I think these days self-publishing is so easy that it's almost become its own barrier because you now have self-doubt. You don't have if you choose to go down the self-publishing route, you don't necessarily have a publisher who has agreed that this is quality. So you have to make the decision for yourself. And some people abuse that privilege, and other people you sort of limit themselves and not believe that what they've got is quality or worth being published. So currently going through publishing my second book through a publisher, I've actually found that process easier than getting myself self-published.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
So I actually did it back to front. I didn't do any marketing before I self-published my first book. I just kind of wrote it and hit publish and hoped, and didn't work out so well as you would imagine. But what I actually did, just through trial and error and trying to drum up some sales and just other projects I was doing, is I built a community. So I'd recommend that every author who knows they're going to be publishing a book build a community beforehand, and it can start with your friends and family or people that are of similar interest groups, especially if it's nonfiction. Building an audience already that are interested in that subject is hugely beneficial. For me, I started a podcast, so I run the Managing Violence podcast and interview the greatest names in violence management and self-defense in the world, and that has led to a growing demand for my next book, which is all about managing violence.
So with building your community, what were some of the main things that you did when starting out? I know you mentioned the podcast, but what were some of the other things that you did to build that initial core group?
Yeah, so partly, it was leveraging my existing social networks. So I was already quite well connected within the community. So part of that was bringing those together. So I started a Facebook group, which was discussion focused, and invited all the people that I was already connected to into one place, which allowed me to control the messaging. I also was very active in other communities such as Reddit and various forums, both plugging the podcast as well as participating in discussions. I think that's probably one thing that a lot of people get wrong when trying to get known as such, is they all their contributions in various communities are about themselves. And I think to really have any sort of social capital, you have to give more than you take. I think it's very important that, especially if you're trying to set yourself up as an expert who's worthy of writing a nonfiction book, that you need to be contributing free information, and you need to be giving away that expertise. Because my theory's always been that people look at what I give away for free and they go, well, if he's giving this away for free, how good must the stuff be that he charges for? So that's my approach.
Well, one thing you brought up too was the fact that you were talking about you were commenting in other groups via Reddit or these other formats. So how were you able to connect that with your podcast? Were you going, yeah, we had a guy on my show, he had a similar issue, or how are the things that you tied it together that it wasn't, in the pitchy or a salesy type of way? It sounds like you've mastered that.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process, and each community has its own rules about how you can, what you can link to, and try not to be self-promotional and so on. But generally, yeah, I just try to share learnings from the podcast, and rather than linking directly to it, I might say, yeah, here's something that this guest said about that. If you're interested in seeing the whole episode, it's available. But yeah, this might help you with that question. So very rarely do I actually start a topic about an episode. I'll more find the topics or find the questions that have been asked that I can answer. But I never just provide a link in 2 sentences. I always give a decent amount of content without the link, and then I can direct them towards the episode or the YouTube or whatever after that.
Nice, just like an additional comment, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's more just here's the answer to your question, but if you'd like to know more, you can go here.
Yeah, another one of my friends, Matt Stone, he has several different businesses. One of them's Buck Books, and he also has another one with book covers. And one of the things that he did starting out was he did a lot of blogging. And what he would do was actually do comments on other people's blogs. And through time, kind of like what you're talking about, with sharing the value, but then connecting it further to funnel that traffic over, but with the expectation that you're giving the value first, and then you're slowly shifting them over.
Absolutely. You have to give value first. I mean, I think in this modern era, in this generation, we're so over being sold to that anything that feels like a pitch or feels like ad copy, people just tune out. And I think that's the only way to get around that is to actually be authentic and to be trying to legitimately help people. And if you drum up some commercial business as a result of that, all well and good. If all you do is improve people's quality of life with the information you provide them, then that should be its own reward as well.
Exactly. It's not about a script. It's not about a pitch. It's about genuinely connecting. When people see you for real, that closes the deal better than anything else.
Absolutely. And respond to messages.
Yes.
Don't be too big to respond to inboxes. It's amazing what's come out of me just saying thank you to people when they offer a compliment.
Well, speaking of books, I'd like to know what is your favorite book and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Okay, so I racked my brain about this because, like a lot of authors, I guess we all have 1,000 books that could be our favorite book, given what day of the week it is. But the one that came to mind is a book called Watch My Back by Jeff Thompson. Jeff Thompson was a martial artist turned bouncer, so kind of similar life story to me, in the UK in the 70s and 80s, who had massive issues overcoming fear of conflict stemming from abuse in childhood. And he started bouncing in some very rough places in Coventry in the UK. And was involved in some pretty horrific violence during that particular time in history, and overcame his fear in that regard. But most interesting about Jeff is that he actually went on to become a BAFTA-winning author and playwright. And part of that was him overcoming intellectual disabilities, or not disabilities rather, but learning difficulties and language difficulties, and eventually mastering the idea of writing and communicating. And he approaches his fear of violence and conflict the same way he approached his fear of writing. And so his first book, which was Watch My Back, which was essentially an autobiography that's really written. It reads like a novel. It's amazingly well written. But he wrote that book on his breaks while working in a factory in the toilets. So he literally would take a bathroom break, take a pen and paper and a notepad, and he would write his book in the company bathroom until it was finished. And it's an amazing book, and it's an amazing testament to what can be achieved by confronting those fears and just putting pen to paper.
Well, and for those who aren't too familiar with BAFTA, it's basically the British equivalent of the Oscars. So the fact that he is acknowledged by BAFTA, that's huge.
Yeah, he's an amazing individual. So that's, definitely look into Jeff. He's moved well beyond the bouncer martial artist stereotype now. He's a proper writer, and all his work is brilliant.
Nice. Well, for our final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
Okay. I've always heard this attributed to Will Smith. I have no idea if he actually said it, but I'm going to give Will Smith credit because that's how I know it. But the quote is, being realistic is the most common road to travel to mediocrity. Why would you want to be realistic? And I think that's the reason that speaks to me is that what's realistic really depends upon your mindset in the moment. And sometimes we limit ourselves to just what we can see now. We don't know what we're excluding from the realm of possibilities. And I think if you stick to just making realistic decisions, as he says, you'll only end up traveling the road to mediocrity. Don't be realistic.
Excellent. Well, Joe, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Yeah, so the best place to find me is on my website, which is www.joesaunders.com.au. That's JoeSaunders.com.au. You'll have my podcasts and blog articles and books all available on that website.
Well, Joe, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate being on the show.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.